All right, welcome back to another episode of the CVD podcast. I'm here today with Peter Katz. Peter, I'm very, very excited to have you on today.
It's nice to be here with you, Adam.
Yeah, I mean, we met back in 2018 through Blake Fly. I feel like I've said that name so many times on this podcast already. Blake is an amazing entrepreneur, super inspiring, and he was running it was Project Finished. It was basically like an entrepreneur accountability group during the summer of 2018. And we were in the same sort of cohort, I guess you could call it. And we were both sort of working on our own projects. We didn't talk a whole lot I don't think we talked a whole lot during the time that we had together there, but I've basically been following you ever since. I was inspired by you pretty quickly. And I admire you for a number of different reasons. I mean, you're a very vulnerable person, and that comes out a lot in your music, and I really appreciate that, and I think it's something that more people need to lean into. And so I'm really excited to really dive into your story and how you've gotten to where you are and how you've embraced discomfort and vulnerability. So I'm super happy that you're here, and why don't we just start off with you giving a little bit of an introduction of who you are as a person and what you do, and then we'll go from there.
Sounds good. Thank you for that. And let's see who I am as a person. I guess we always typically go to like what we do. So I will buck the trend, and I'll try to start not from there. I don't have a planned answer though. So let's see who I am as a person. I think foundationally, I kind of wake up every day and try to be a person of integrity. I do this youth mentoring work every summer. And that's kind of like the number one word that we talk about. And actually in my keynotes, I have this thing that I call the head on the pillow rule, which is kind of that check in with yourself when you go to bed. Like, have I tried my best? Have I helped others to do their best? And so I think those two questions are kind of what drive me every day. And if I get to the end of the night and I can't answer yes to both of those questions, then I think I'm the kind of person that gets up and tries again tomorrow.
I love that little check. It's so simple, but it's so effective. I really like that.
I call it my head on the pillow rule. And I think that's kind of the most honest moment, right? Where you sort of release the day and you're like, all right, did I do the thing or did I not do the thing? And it's, of course, you got to have a lot of self-compassion in those moments, and it's okay if you didn't do the thing. But I think just having those little markers along the way of, okay, I'm gonna do better tomorrow. I really feel like I live that, and I feel proud of that, actually.
Yeah, you should feel proud of that. Yeah. That's a really cool check. And I mean, you never know how many people actually do it, but something that's so simple can just, I don't know. I feel like if you say yes to both of those things, do you sleep just like a little bit more peacefully?
Yeah, I do. And it's funny. It almost becomes like a micro check throughout the day. Like it's something that I started doing, and now I almost do it just throughout the day. So if I'm in a situation and I'm like, oh, I could have handled that better, it's like I have that. I'm sort of tapped into that part of myself, like those synapses or whatever are all wired together. So it ends up being not just at the end of the night. It kind of ends up being throughout the day. So generally, by the time you get to the end of the night, you've made it. So
yeah, you're already like, I feel like doing it more throughout the day allows you to have more yeses by the time your head hits the pillow.
Yeah, but there really is there's a lot of data to be gleaned from kind of how you feel when you hit the pillow, and then how you feel when you wake up and you're about to lift your head from the pillow. There's a lot of kind of truth that lives in those moments, I think. So I'd like to think that that's sort of who I am foundationally. And of course I have important relationships in my life that I try to show up for, and I'm really focused on like health, and I miss the mark sometimes. I like keep myself too busy, but yeah, like I remember reading a book when I was younger that my mom gave me. It was called 30 Lessons for Living. And this guy interviewed 1,000 people over the age of 65 and kind of compiled all of their key wisdom. And one of the things that really changed my life was this idea that your body, the idea is not to live to whatever age. It's to live in health for as long as possible, and not to spend the last quarter or third of your life sort of trapped in a hell of a body. and then he sort of had this image of like your body as this like thing that you're investing in every day. And so that really struck me. So I think I think about that a lot. And yeah, I'm somebody who loves to have fun. Like I love just being with friends, and yeah, that's kind of my great joy is like being in nature, being with friends, those kind of things. So that's me separate from what I do. And as far as what I do, most of my adult life has been as a touring singer-songwriter. So playing 150 to 200 shows a year, all around the world, really. And then that kind of naturally evolved into giving keynotes. I call them keynote concerts. Initially, I was giving keynotes for youth. That was kind of my entry point. And then now I give keynotes for companies, organizations, associations, governments, kind of everything under the sun, keynote concerts. And what I've been doing in the last year or two as well is not just doing the keynote, but also I've done a lot of facilitation training. And so I'm also involved in like agenda design and facilitating throughout the day, and just kind of creating the whole experience. So I do that. I do keynotes, and I'm also just working on a new album. And so music for me is like, I'm going to be writing and playing music for my whole life. And I'm going to be doing concerts and all that stuff my whole life. It's just the ratios are evolving.
The ratios are evolving, and 150 to 200 shows a year. Wow. That's pretty wild. And are you on like a full touring schedule now, like traveling wise, or is it still majority virtual?
Well, so music touring has kind of paused for the time being. I will be doing some much more focused touring. Like I'm not going to go out for 6 months anymore like I used to do. I think I would do like 1 or 2 weeks of just the right shows, and because my speaking work has really just blossomed so beautifully, and as well as the facilitation work. And so I'm really energized by that. It's also, when we talk about the health piece, it's easier on my health and my constitution, and just my financial health. But I'm very busy traveling for speaking and that kind of stuff. And so I would say as of around May, all of a sudden a switch was flipped, and in-person stuff started coming roaring back. And I've been traveling quite a lot. And in October, November, I have quite an enormous amount of travel, actually.
It's like, I don't know how many shows, but there are a lot. I'm traveling.
I know there's a lot.
Places.
Yeah. I know there's a lot. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I mean, so, where can people find your music, first of all? Because, I just want to get that in here so that people can go download your music and whatnot, because I've listened to not all of your songs. I've listened to some of them, and like I said, love like not only the music, but like the lyrics and the vulnerability and the different things that you talk about in your songs. I really appreciate how sort of open and transparent you are in them. So I would love to sort of get that out there and have people go check it out.
Oh, thanks. Well, peterkatz.com is a good hub. And obviously I'm on all the streaming platforms, all the places, just under Peter Katz. Although Spotify, puts like I can't control what songs Spotify puts first. So just make sure you listen to some of the more recent stuff, 'cause there's some really old stuff that they just put up front, 'cause I guess it's got some legs, which I'm grateful for, but you always want people to hear like the thing you've made most recently, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. And you also do the speaking, and you can find that on Peter's website as well. And let's kind of get into that, because I mean, you talked about I know that you had to pivot during COVID, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, that the speaking started before that, right? And you started doing these keynote concerts. So, I mean, tell me, what is a keynote concert? Like, what does that mean? And what different sort of events do you do?
Yeah, so the keynote concert was born, I guess, a couple years after I started doing this youth mentoring work, and there's a whole backstory there where this youth mentoring program had been using my music as part of their curriculum.
I read that. I saw this one video where you said, "Oh yeah, it was almost like these teenagers were being forced to listen to my music."
Yeah, they were, which is a great business model. So, anyways, through that work, they invited me to come work for them, and so I kind of pause music speaking. I pause everything every summer, and I go out to Alberta, and I do this work, and I love it. But the people that I work with there, continue to work with there. I was just there a few weeks ago. They were the ones that said, "Hey, I think you could take this music that you do and the way that you are with youth, and you could put that together in something that would be really compelling for high schools." And so my friend Dave, who runs Faces, that's the name of the program, he helped me every time I was out in Alberta. He'd like take the afternoon off, we'd go for lunch, and we kind of mapped out the first keynote concert. And keynote concert being, it's a keynote, but about, I don't know, a quarter to a third of it is me actually playing songs, and the songs are not just randomly chosen. They're kind of anchoring the themes and the stories and whatever I've just been talking about. And so Dave helped me develop this youth keynote called Why I Seek Discomfort, which I know is a good overlap with what you talk about. And I, the basic premise of that first keynote that I created was like the idea of standing in front of a microphone and singing songs that you wrote about your heart, in your bedroom in front of a dimly lit room full of strangers is fundamentally a terrible idea, because there's so many things that can go wrong in that equation. It's just like not a very safe thing to do. And yet by doing this uncomfortable thing, it has created the fabric of my life and led to the most incredible experiences. And the sort of one of the key takeaways that I share with the high school students that I do it for is this idea that the reason that you feel vulnerable and uncomfortable is because you really care about what you're doing. And the more you care about what you're doing, the more vulnerable and uncomfortable that you feel. But if you kind of reframe the vulnerable, uncomfortable feeling, it's actually a clue to follow those vulnerable, uncomfortable things, because they're leading you on a path and a life of doing those things that you really care about. And then the kind of punchline at the end of the talk is I sort of tell all these stories of how standing in front of a microphone doing this vulnerable thing led to all of these incredible things in my life. But I sort of highlight that standing in front of a microphone is not the only place in life that we have the opportunity to be vulnerable. There's all kinds of situations, whether that's having a difficult conversation or trying out for a sports team or, whatever that might be. And after I've told them all these stories, I say, if all of that is on the other side of my discomfort, what's on the other side of yours? So getting them to be curious about those vulnerable feelings and seeing them as these like actual lights along the road to follow. So
I love the way that you've reframed that, and I'm like, I want to go to one of these talks. Like, we should do this at my high school my old high school, because people would definitely benefit from it. And I love the reframing that you talk about there, and the way, because I feel like, especially when you're younger, I mean, even now in my 20s, it took quite a while for me to identify what the uncomfortability, like where it was coming from and what it actually meant and how I could sort of reframe it. And, I kind of reframed it to be like, the more often I get outside my comfort zone, the more familiar I'm going to be with how my body reacts, and the better I'm going to be at handling the stress of everyday life, basically. That was sort of my hypothesis, and that came to be true by continuously stepping outside my comfort zone. And it's so interesting because, like, literally just yesterday, my sister Amanda had messaged me, and her daughter Alice is starting her first day of grade 1 today. And she had texted me saying, "Hey, Alice is feeling like really nervous about her first day of grade 1, and she thinks that talking to Uncle Adam would really help." And so I get on a FaceTime with her, and she's like, I'm feeling really nervous. I'm mostly excited, but I'm also feeling really nervous." And I was like, I used to feel like really kind of scared when I used to feel nervous, but now most of the time when I'm nervous, it's nervous and excited. And what that means is that, it's something that you really care about. So it's very similar to sort of what you were saying about the vulnerability and the discomfort, because, it's something that you do really care about, and it's something that can really be like a good teacher, right, for these different experiences. And so I think that it's really, really cool that you do this talk with high school students. And, I wanted to ask, I think we've touched on this a little bit already, but like, why is that so important to you to deliver that talk to like that specific audience?
I'll answer that question in a second, but fun
Sure.
fact, side note. Well, one, I have a niece named Alice as well. So,
oh, wow.
we're Alice uncle buddies. But two, I remember my first day of grade 1, and I had skipped kindergarten, and so I was like really younger than everybody else, and I went to the school, and I didn't know where to go. I was like just crying, and I walked into the wrong first grade class, but the teacher just took such pity on me that she ended up taking me into her class, and they switched that I ended up being in her class for all of grade 1. Just cause we bonded on that first day. So, anyways, that's my grade 1 story. So I hope Alice has a wonderful first day.
We're going to talk about her. And I said, you can call Uncle Adam tomorrow and tell me all about your first day. And she was super excited about that. So I'll hear from her later today.
So you asked, why is it important for me to do this work and with young people? And I mean, there's two answers to that. There's the sort of, more altruistic answer in the sense that like, I really want to give back to young people. I had like a lot of challenges kind of from, in the early teenage years, and so I feel a very special connection with kids of that age. So like my partner is a children's performer, and she's like really focused on the little kids, and she sort of had her most challenging times in that time of her life. And we often talk that like, I think when you've been through something, you have this greater empathy and compassion, and you're able to resonate. One of my best friends like works in addiction and recovery, and he had addiction issues himself. So he's able to show up in his role as a social worker with just a level of compassion and empathy that I think others would not. So, I just feel a deep love and connection for young people, especially for teenagers. I just still see myself in them, and want to offer them some of the things that maybe I wish I had at that time. And I also think like, cause I would say like 90 to 95% of my speaking work right now is not with teenagers. It's in corporate and associations and government and association, organizations. And I love that work as well. And there's something sort of, this is more on the selfish side in a way that like it fills my cup. Like I really feel like in a very clear way, I feel like I've never walked away from a youth talk without just feeling totally filled up afterwards. So, came back from a conference in Nashville, and it was like a really big deal. And I was like the opening keynote on the main stage for like thousands of people. And, but I also did like a breakout session for the youth there. And I loved both things, but there's something like just so heartwarming and special, about speaking with youth, that no matter kind of what happens in my life, I always want that to be a part of what I do.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like it's going to stick around.
Yeah.
And I love that it's a core part of what you do. I mean, even though like 95% is other things, I love that, you keep like continue these types of talks, because I think it's super important. And I'm going to flip the question a little bit on you before we move on to maybe some other topics, is why do you think it's important for the youth at that age to receive this type of message?
Well, it's funny. So the mentoring work that I do every summer, they're all like grade 9 going into grade 10. So all like 15, 16 kind of an age. And I see them as like kind of half kid, half adult, right? You have like one foot in each world. And so they're like, you have the sort of emotionality and reactivity sometimes of a kid, but then you also have like kind of new responsibilities and a desire for greater independence. And there's these kind of, these two forces, right? And I think that as we get older and older, we get thicker and thicker shells around us. And when you want to get at the core vulnerability or those deeper emotions of a kind of a fully grown adult, you got to sort of like hammer away a little longer. Yeah. Whereas with teenagers, I find they'll definitely present with a shell, and their hoodies are up, or there's, sunglasses are on, or they don't want to talk to you, or there's like a, big attitude or whatever that might be. But if you just show up with love, with care, with curiosity, I have never worked with a teenager where the shell didn't eventually come down. Like it's like my best friend Joss, she's a therapist, and we've worked for many years doing the youth mentoring work. She always says there's no bad kids, there's only sad kids. And so your job as a mentor or teacher, or whatever role that you're in, is to really manage your own reactivity and to show up with curiosity. And one of her favorite words is the word wow. So when somebody's having like a big reaction, you just say wow. And wow is like, wow, I see that you're really having a big feeling. I'm really curious about what might be happening. But it's not like, you're not kind of getting deep into the weeds. You're just sort of staying there with curiosity. And so to answer your question, I think hopefully a bit more directly is I feel like it's a special moment, to sort of plant some seeds at that moment. As they're stepping into adulthood, as they're stepping into a time in their life where they'll have more agency, to show them that they have choice, that they are not beholden to their thoughts and feelings, that they can work on their thoughts and feelings, that they can move into action even if their thoughts and feelings are not necessarily there, that they can do hard things, and just sort of build the habit of doing hard things, of talking about your needs, of being able to identify people that you can trust and connect with. I like to be an adult that they can really trust, and that they can know I have their back, I have their best interest in mind, and they can know that there's good people out there, that the world is not a terrible place. And because some of them come from very difficult experiences and maybe haven't had an adult that they truly trust. And so I want to, if possible, help create that, so that can ideally help shape their trajectory. And I've been doing the work for 10 years now, that I've seen the sort of long tail of it. And I've had students that were with me when they were 15, 16, and they're now on my staff, or they've gone on to become therapists or social workers or teachers or whatever, like, and they sort of credit their time at faces and doing the youth work as the reason that they changed course. So not that I take credit for that, but I think to offer those resources to teenagers at that moment, I think is really important.
Yeah, there are so many important things that you mentioned there, and two of them that I'll just stick out or just point out. One, for the facilitators, teachers, is to show up with curiosity and to really try your best to sort of understand, right? I think that one quote that my wife and I use a lot that kind of really sums things up is, we always listen to understand, not listen to reply. And right. I think a lot of times, where there are times, and I'm of course guilty of it too, where we sort of are listening just to be able to give our response and whatnot, or to react to what's happening. But to be really curious about what a child's going through is really interesting. And then the second point that I want to highlight is you saying that, you're doing this to show them that they have a choice. And I think that is fundamental to helping them grow as people and grow into adulthood, is to really highlight, okay, yeah, maybe it has been this way for, all of your life, but you do have a choice. You do have a choice. You can talk about, what's going on, or, you can choose a different path. Is it going to be hard? Yeah, of course it's going to be hard, but these are some of these harder things are what's actually going to lead to some of the most rewarding things in your life. So I think that's really, really, important. And, I would love to be able to one day be talking to youth as well about discomfort. I have like a little dream to actually sort of make like a children's show that kind of teaches them about discomfort and vulnerability, because I don't think that there's enough of it in the classroom. I don't think that there's enough of that type of learning, because I think that goes beyond the classroom, and that's like a foundation for like I said, stepping into who you're going to be as an adult. So I think you're doing some amazing work.
Thanks. Well, I want to see that show that you're describing.
Yeah. Well, whenever it does come to fruition, I'll let you know. Maybe I'll get you in as a collaborator, or throw you in and get you to make some music for it or something.
Sounds good.
I think that would be awesome. Great. So, you talked about these keynote concerts, and I'm very curious of, I read a few articles about the keynote concerts and about these different conferences and whatnot. And some of the testimonials are like, we had no idea that, so many people, so many of our employees would be like emotional after this like keynote talk or this keynote concert, as you call them. And I also read that you wanted to make music that people would feel. Do you want to take me through a little bit about like what that means and why these keynote concerts could be, so important?
Yeah, I think I've had several clients say these exact words, which is kind of cool, which where they say, "You gave us what we didn't know we needed." And I love that. It seems like an elusive thing to shoot for, because you're like, what is it? Please tell me more. What did I give you?
How do I sell that?
I don't even know. But I do know. I do know, and I think it's kind of why I moved into like doing keynotes, and I think it's why I've been able to find my place in that world quite quickly, is that I always wrote music about the things that kind of hit me. Like if I was walking through the world and something made me stop, I would write about it. Whether that's, a song I wrote for Oliver Schroer, who is this violinist who learned that he had terminal cancer, and in that moment that they told him he had terminal cancer, he realized he felt at peace because he didn't need to change anything in his life. And so he organized this concert and played this sold-out concert. He called it his last show on his tour of this planet. And a month later, he passed away. And I just was like, wow, that's the ultimate state for a human being to aspire to be in. And so I wrote a song about it. But it's not just sad things that hits me. It's sometimes joyful feelings or just like inspiring stories or whatever that might be. And so I think I've always, in my music, and this is now in my speaking work, I've always tried to sort of shine a light on this notion that, hey, we're humans, and despite the headlines, like the 99.9% of human beings are good, and we want the same foundational things. We want food on the table. We want our loved ones to be cared for, and we want our hearts to be heard and seen. And so I've always just tried to create moments for that to occur. And so I think when you come to one of my keynotes or one of my concerts, there's that moment of dropping into your heart, saying like hello to yourself, maybe for the first time in a long time. And there's a real power in doing that surrounded by other people. And so especially over the last many years, where we've all been called to pivot and show up and juggle a million different things and be resilient and do all these things, which there's been incredible evidence of that, and people have truly done unbelievable things. Mm-hmm. I want to make sure that we create an opportunity to celebrate that and to recognize that, and to also say, hey, maybe there's a toll to that too. Like, what do you need to, maybe you need to give yourself a squeeze on the shoulder, or catch your breath, or sing a song, or listen to an inspiring story, or hear your inspiring story reflected back. So, that's really kind of what I try to create, is in a moment for people to sort of re-encounter themselves and to really celebrate themselves and each other.
And that's really interesting. And I noticed on your website that you've got, a number of different sort of topics that you talk about. And you just mentioned one, which was resiliency and dealing with change. And so like, how is it, or why is it so sort of important that you bring like your own sort of vulnerability or your own experiences into like one of these keynote concerts and make it sort of overlap with some of the things that the audience members are experiencing as well?
Well, I was very mindful when I started giving keynotes. In fact, I was uncomfortable when I started giving keynotes, in the sense that I felt like, what the heck do I have to offer? Like, I'm not a psychologist, or I'm not a researcher. Like, I don't want to get up here and talk about stuff that I don't really know. So I was like, well, I'm not an expert on anything, I sort of thought. But then I realized, well, what I am an expert on is I have thrown myself in uncomfortable situations for my entire life. And I have said yes to the things that most people don't say yes to, and that's okay. I don't blame. It's probably smart to not say yes to some of the choices that I've made in my life as far as career path and that kind of stuff. Certainly not the most stable of paths. But because I've sort of operated at that vibration, I've had to develop tools to kind of find my way through. I mean, the head on the pillow rule is a great example. It's like, when you do the head on the pillow rule, it's like you're really nurturing your self-love and self-compassion, because when things go wrong, if you know that every night for a decade you've been checking in with yourself, and you know that you're trying your best and helping others to do their best, like, how hard can you really be on yourself in that moment? You're like, well, geez, like, what more could I ask of myself? And so that creates a foundational self-love and self-compassion. And so I have these things that I've developed through doing that have been helpful to me. And as I've shared them with people, I recognize that they have a universality to them. And I like that you use the word overlap, because that is something that I really focus on whenever I'm working with different audiences. Is I really ask myself, I'm like, okay, how do their experiences and my experiences overlap? And like, what are they really doing? Like, if I'm speaking to a group of real estate agents, you might think, okay, real estate, that has nothing to do with like being an artist and a speaker. But if you think about what a real estate transaction really is, that's like one of the most vulnerable, important moments in somebody's life. Like, it's like, that's, you know, the young couple sitting on the empty living room floor because they can't afford furniture, like eating out of a pizza box. They've just moved in and like spent their life savings buying their first home. Or that's the group of siblings that just maybe lost a parent and they need to come together and sell the home so that they can make sure that the other parent is taken care of. And I mean, there's like the purchase and sale of home is a really important moment. And so real estate agents, like, if they want to be great real estate agents, they actually need to really show up in service with care and compassion and thoughtfulness of the people that they're serving. And so I can help them with that. I can help them tap into that humanity. Or like, I really speak to almost every industry under the sun. And I know the kind of value of like niching yourself, but I think I sort of niche myself a little bit more in the topic. But as long as there's people in the audience that have a beating heart, I feel like I can probably do something to be of service to them.
So all of them, all the talks. Yeah.
Pretty much.
Oh, and that's really interesting that you mention, you know, how you can be of service, because I heard that, or I read that over and over again when I was looking at your, you know, watching your videos or going through your website or your posts. How can I be of service? And I think that's really, really important, because I think it allows you to just show up in completely different ways than you would if you didn't ask yourself that question. I just want to quickly touch on that before I ask you about something else. So, like, was there a time in your career where you weren't necessarily asking yourself that question? And, you know, did you really kind of see a shift once you did start asking that question?
Well, what comes to mind as you ask that question, so I'm just going to do this. There we go. What comes to mind for me as you ask that question is, I think there was a shift that sort of coincided with the youth mentoring work.
Okay.
And so I think, like, every artist, and I'm not questioning any other artist that says this. Truly, I'm not. I'm only going to speak for myself. But, like, there's this thing of like, I do it for the fans, you know, like, it's like, I'm here for you. And if I really think about it, I part of me was, and I think throughout my entire career, I'm very confident that there's thousands of people that you could talk to out there who would say, Peter went the extra mile for me. He showed up at my father's funeral and played a song. Like, I definitely always went the extra mile to show up and have deep, meaningful connection with the people that came to my shows. I've always done that. I have detailed notes on people, and when I go to a city, I try to, you know, remember everybody's names and remember. I always remember the stories, and so I definitely did that. But there was also like a healthy ego just driving the show and wanting to be famous and wanting to be like the coolest person in the room, like, oh, I'm a musician, you know, and there's you get like plenty of pats on the head for that too. Like, it's in a way, it's hard to resist that. But when I started doing the youth mentoring work, I remember in that first summer, it's like, I wanted the kids to like me. I wanted them to think that I was cool. Like, I know that I created a really impactful experience for them. But I think my motivations were a little bit murky. But what I've learned in doing that work is that I really had to embody the thing that I was trying to convey. And so if I was teaching them, like, if you want to teach somebody about integrity, you have to, like, your number one job is to practice integrity in your own life. Like, anything that we want to teach or share or mentor or whatever, the number one job is to live that thing in your own life. And so I would say my evolution, if I think about that work, and I kind of have these nice kind of timestamps because I do it every summer, is I really have shifted where I don't actually care, like, if they think I'm cool or like if they like me or like, I just want them to know that I love and care about them. And I want them to feel like I have their back and that I am there for them. And I show up, I know, with that spirit. And so if I think about how that kind of dovetails with my music and with my speaking work, the way that I look at a concert or a keynote concert or anything that I'm doing right now is I don't want you to walk away thinking I'm amazing. I want you to walk away thinking you're amazing. I don't want you to walk away thinking, wow, look at all the great things that Peter did. I want you to walk away saying, wow, look at all the great things that I can do. And so that is, like in my facilitation training, they say it's like moving from being the sage from the stage to the guide from the side. And that's kind of the journey that I'm on. And here's the great thing about that is if you actually show up in service of people, you actually have a much better business model. Like, you know, Seth Godin, great marketing writer and speaker, he talks about this a lot, that like if you look at some of the greatest, most successful entrepreneurs and companies, it's like they made something that really made people's lives better. Not all across the board, you could argue. But like generally it's like, hey, I don't know why I'm thinking this example, maybe because I'm like looking at a kettle right now, but it's like, it used to be harder to boil water, and then like somebody invented a kettle, and you're like, whoa, this is a way better way to boil water. And millions and billions of people wanted to buy a kettle because it just really helped them get their morning coffee or whatever that is, right? And so the truth is, if you really do show up in service of people, if you really do make their lives better, you're actually going to be more successful in your business. And so those two things have kind of all aligned. That was a surprise to me, I guess. That was the beautiful surprise of it, I guess.
Yeah. And again, sounds like a really, really big sort of shift that just, and what's really sort of got my attention is what you said, where I don't want the audience members to leave thinking, oh, Peter is amazing. I want them to leave thinking, wow, I'm amazing, which is, I think if you just take those two sort of sentences and put them at the core of a concert or a keynote concert, those keynote concerts are going to look completely different from one another because they are so fundamentally different.
They are. And it's that sort of philosophy or that approach or that filter has worked its way into everything I do. And so, for example, I have a song of mine called Come Down. And in the past, I might have introduced like the whole backstory, like, oh, I was in Hawaii and this and blah, blah, blah. And I met this person and blah, blah, blah. Like there'd be like a whole story around that song. And then you'd listen to the song and you'd be thinking about Peter in Hawaii and like this whole thing, right? Instead, now I'm like, this is a song about letting go. And we all have things that we hold on to that truthfully we hold on to them for a reason. Maybe they've kept us safe. We developed them along the way because they served us. But at some point we realize that they're not serving us anymore. So as I play this song, like, what is something that's present for you that you're like, okay, I'd like to let go of that in order to make room for something new, right? So all of a sudden, the song is getting you to think about you and your life. The song is now positioned in service of you versus, hey, everybody, look at how awesomely I can sing, or look at how awesomely I've written this song, or here's my story. I'm still bringing myself to the table because I'm not sort of separating myself. I'm like, I have things I need to let go of as well. That's why I wrote this song. But like, I'm teeing it up so that it's for you. It's not for me. And that is fundamentally different from how I used to do it and think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you're using your song as like a vehicle to really establish common ground. I mean, like even the language that you use in that first little intro, I know that you gave a little example there, like even the words that you used in the second example, saying this song's about letting go, and all of us need to let something go. It's all about establishing that common ground and not taking it and saying, here, it's me, me, me. It's, all of us, we are connected. This is where that overlap actually occurs, which is a totally different, it allows somebody to sort of listen to that song with totally different ears, which I think is
Correct.
really, really important. And, a lesson that I'm going to try to really embody in my, the work that I do moving forward, because I think that's super important. And I think that, those little shifts can really help, in just transforming sort of what we do and how we really, show up for other people. And I think that's really important. So I'm going to jot that down as soon as this podcast episode is over and put it on my bulletin board or something, just so that I remember that, with everything I do. One of the other things that you mentioned when you were describing, your keynote concerts, and the different topics is embodying, the different lessons or different topics that you're covering, for example, integrity. And so I wanted to ask you, and you sort of touched on this a tiny bit already, is how do you embody the person that is always, doing uncomfortable things or seeking discomfort? How do you do those things on a regular basis, or sort of how have you done that throughout your life? Because obviously, it can be this scary, nerve-wracking thing. So I want to know a little bit more about how you've made that sort of a core of who you are.
Well, it's funny. I have two answers. The first one is probably not that useful to anybody,
Okay.
but I'll share it anyways. Part of me feels like I just have an affliction where I just can't help myself, and specifically related to writing songs and wanting to share them. It's almost like if I could not do it, probably would have done that, because it's just not the easiest path. But I just couldn't, if I'm feeling something big or there's something big to process, it's almost like, oh, I guess I have to write a song about this. And then I write the song. I'm like, I guess I have to share this. But really, I want to, I want to write the song. I want to share it. And it's just something inside of me that I that I must do, almost annoyingly so sometimes. I don't want to let the muse know that I don't love it. I do. Thank you, muse. But it's just sort of how I'm wired. That's not really helpful to anybody. But I do think that there's also I'm going to use the word momentum. There's a momentum to doing one hard, uncomfortable thing, not dying, not realizing that the world didn't fall apart, realizing that even if you failed, you learned something, all of those kind of things. And then it just makes you be like, oh, okay, that wasn't so bad. Or, oh, I actually grew into the kind of person that could do that thing that I didn't know how to do. Because the other side of why we feel vulnerable and uncomfortable, I think, beyond the fact that we really care about the thing, is because we also genuinely feel like we can't do it. So it's I can't get up there and sing a song. I've never done that before. I don't have any evidence that that's going to go well. But if you do it anyways, the first time you do it, it's probably not going to be awesome. But by doing it the first time, then you get better at it, and you get better at it, and you get better at it. And all of a sudden, you are the kind of person that can play a song in front of people. And so the vulnerable, uncomfortable feeling also kind of illuminates the delta or the gap between the person that you want to be and the person that you are. And if you do the thing anyways, then you become the person that you want to be. And so I feel like there's this momentum of realizing that, oh, the more I do these vulnerable, uncomfortable things, the more I grow into the person that I want to be. And the more evidence that I gather that it's a worthwhile thing for me to do and a worthwhile kind of vibration for me to be operating at. So I think at this point, I think of Paulo Coelho's book, The Alchemist. I'm paraphrasing here, but he essentially says, like, once your heart has spoken to you, you can never unhear it. And so I feel like I know too much at this point, that I know that that's the way I want to live my life. I know that that is the path to a life of meaning and fulfillment and of healthy challenges and of growth. And so I can't live any other way at this point. It's like, that's the only path as far as I'm concerned. Yeah,
I feel you on that one. I'm with you on that. Sort of, I have, like, this is the way that I have to live life. I don't think that I can do it any other way after kind of experiencing that. And it's interesting that you talk about momentum, because I heard this quote that basically just said momentum is always working. It's either working sort of for you or working against you, but it's always working, right? And the longer it is going one way, the harder it is to stop and to turn around, right? For example, if you're living a very sedentary lifestyle and you start gaining weight and momentum's moving in that direction, the longer and longer you wait, right? The longer the momentum goes that way, the harder it is to sort of turn that around and get back to that sort of healthy lifestyle. And also, like, with our I know that our brains work like that. When you talk about doing like the first sort of scary or uncomfortable thing, our brains, at first, it's just a chemical reaction that happens. And if you do it over and over again, eventually your brain literally changes structure so that it becomes faster and you're actually able to do it, and it becomes more familiar to your brain. And so the momentum is actually working neurologically as well, which can be super important, because you just become more familiar with that sort of those feelings and that response and that sort of uncertainty. And, you mentioned, getting up on stage for the first time, and, it might not be great, but at least you're doing it. What was your first sort of like experience? Like, maybe, I don't know if it's with a big crowd or like one of your big concerts. What really sticks out to you, from the first time that you like really, really put yourself out there for like a show or an album?
Yeah, my first live performance, if we go way back, I was like a little kid, like at summer camp doing Little Shop of Horrors in Greece and that kind of stuff. But my first kind of live performance of my own music was at the open mic in university, actually. Well, actually, no, that's not true. I did do something when I was in high school, an original song, and then I didn't write another one for about 6 years. But the kind of seminal moment for me was the open mic in university, and I actually talk about this in my Why I Seek Discomfort talk. Is I would go to this open mic every week, and I would not put my name on the piece of paper because it was terrifying to me. But I knew that I really, 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 really wanted to be up there. And so it took me several months of going to this open mic and just sitting there and like wishing that I had the courage. And eventually the voice in my head that says, don't do this, was like 1/1000th of a decibel quieter than the voice in my head that said, I really want to do this. And I played an original song, and it probably wasn't good. I don't remember, but it was a really good feeling that I had done it. And I went back the next week, and then I found that there was other open mics, and I was going up to like 4 open mics a week, and eventually started booking my own shows. But that's like the momentum that you're just talking about, of like momentum in the right direction. So, but it took a minute to take that first leap.
Yeah, I bet it did. And I'm sure that every single week you're sitting there, like you're like kind of listening to the music, but you're also just having this battle in your head, sort of back and forth of like, do it, don't do it, do it, don't do it.
Yeah, so, it's definitely.
Go ahead.
No, I mean, you sort of like grease the wheel at a certain point where, but like I mentioned earlier that I've been doing like kind of facilitation and agenda design and larger stuff like that. And that's like, there's at some point you're always kind of back to the drawing board. Like you're always back to but you're never quite back at zero again. There's I might be butchering his name. I think it's Roberto Rodriguez. He's the film director, and he talks about this idea. I heard him in an interview of basically like the transferability of your skills, and so so like when he makes a movie, he sometimes like writes the music for it or designs the poster, or he's the director. Sometimes like he's a guy who sort of wears many hats. And he sort of talked about like, well, when I move from being the director to writing the music, for example, you might think that this is like an entirely new realm that I need to learn. He said, but what you're missing is that when I move from one idiom or, modality to another, I'm bringing with me all of my taste and all of my like thoughtfulness and my creativity and my problem solving. Like I'm bringing over all of these skill sets that I developed doing this one thing into this new thing. And there's only about like a 10% new thing that I have to learn. Like, okay, I have to learn music theory, or, I have to learn like how to write notation, but I don't have to relearn all of my taste, all of my creative instincts, all of that has been developed over here, and I'm just going to move that over here. Right. But like learning that new 10% or doing the thing you've never done still puts you back in that kind of vulnerable, uncomfortable place. And so I'm now in that place where it's like, okay, this giant organization, I'm not just coming in and doing a keynote. I remember when I started doing the keynote, just how vulnerable and uncomfortable that was. And I felt like I had these like islands that I was hopping between, which was like the storytelling, songwriting parts. I was like, I can do that because I've done that thousands of times. But the like speaking part, I'm like getting away with something. And then, now I'm going to do a song and tell a story. I know how to do that. And then eventually I learned that I could do the in-between parts just as well as I could do the singing and storytelling parts. And now I feel that sense of like, okay, I can do this. But then I'm still always pushing myself like, oh, now I need a new talk or whatever. But with this facilitation stuff, I'm like back in that mode of, oh, okay, I'm not even doing the thing that I know is like a home run. I'm designing and I'm facilitating and I'm wearing a different hat. But I've literally stood on stage in front of hundreds of thousands of people. Like I have spent my life thinking on my toes with people. Well, what is the number one skill set of being a facilitator, right? It's like, you gotta be present with the people and be able to like manage the flow of energy and be able to really catch and sense what's happening in the room and be able to be reactive to that. Like, I've been doing that for a very long time. I didn't necessarily have a hat that said facilitator on it, but that's what I'm doing. Or now I'm getting into like agenda design and like really thinking about the flow and the impact of the event. Well, I haven't done that in the settings that I'm doing it in exactly, but I've been doing that for years. I mean, when I would tour, I would literally bring a bag of lights with me and I'd walk into the space and I'd be like, okay, this space doesn't feel right. And I'd rearrange the space and I'd decorate and I'd think about like, what's the experience as people are entering the room? Like, what are all the things that are happening beyond the show? Like, so I was thinking holistically about the experience. I've been doing that forever. And so I'm just applying it in a new way. And yes, much reverence for the great facilitators out there. I have a lot to learn, and I'm learning and studying and being mentored by some of the greatest out there. And I bring a lot to the table. And in fact, I actually bring a uniqueness because of this background that I have and all these other things that I've done. I am able to do things that in fact nobody else is able to do because I'm synthesizing and putting them together in a way that maybe nobody else has. And so, I kind of went off on a tangent there, but like that to me is like, okay. What's exciting to me is like, you kind of always want to feel like a beginner again, because it means that you're exploring a new facet. And it's also good to remember that there's a cumulative effect to your experiences. And so you're never right back to the drawing board.
There's a cumulative effect. Yeah, absolutely. And you know what saying like really bothers me that's really related to this is when people say like, oh, I'm back to square one. It's like, no, you're not. Like, for example, I'll give you a really trivial example. My wife and I just moved into a new place and I built us a TV stand. But I had like 4 different ideas, and all of them failed before I finally like came up with the 5th idea that was actually good and actually worked with the tools and materials that I had left. But after every single time, like, sure, it was a little frustrating that like that idea failed, but I wasn't back to square one because I learned something that didn't work. So I was already better off than what square one was, right? So that's one saying, 100%. Sorry, I'm going off maybe on a little tangent, but that's something that just irks me just a little bit because, you know, going through these experiences, you're not back to square one. You've already learned something. You've already experienced something. And like you said, the things that you learn, the things that you do are cumulative and they're transferable. So you might not be starting from scratch all over again. We've only got a few minutes left. So I just wanted to touch on one thing briefly, if we can, before we wrap, before I ask you sort of the wrap up question. You said that you have performed in front of hundreds of thousands of fans, and you described like being uncomfortable in different facets of what you do. Earlier you mentioned imposter syndrome before we started recording. I'm just wondering, how often do you still feel this quite often? Like, is this something that has happened throughout your career? Is there, you know, something that, is it when you try something new that you feel this imposter syndrome? Like, when does this occur, and what does that sort of feel like?
It's endless. Like I feel it constantly. I experience the feeling now, not with terror or with I see it as a good thing. But I absolutely feel it constantly. And I mean, especially, there's been if my music career was this like sort of very slow and steady, sort of tortoise, career growth, my speaking and facilitation has been sort of the more like Justin Bieber trajectory, where like I started and it went boom. And so I'm just like bigger and bigger clients and like higher and higher stakes. And I mean, I'm experiencing that in a big way right now, and which is amazing, right? This is a great thing. And it's also, I feel like, you know, I did something for the House of Commons of the government of Canada. I'm like, what am I going to tell them? Or I'm working on a event right now with like, you know, the largest hospital. And you know, like thousands of people, and like they're looking to me to help them with like really life or death important things. And I'm like, I have to just take some deep breath. But I also, as I dive in and I work on the proposal and I think about what I'm going to do, I realize like, oh, this is going to help. Like I do have things to offer, but, I'm constantly being faced with that. I mean, even if I think I just was working on a new album a few weeks ago, and you sit down and you're like, I don't know how to write a song. I used to, but I don't. But then you do it. You show up, you roll up your sleeves, and you, lo and behold, you write a song, and you write another one. But there's constantly, I think in my line of work, I'm constantly needing to invent things that didn't previously exist. Like a song doesn't exist, and then you write it, and then it does. Or like, you know, these events that I'm creating or the keynotes or whatever, it's like, it only exists as you create it. And that's like a hard thing. And I think in some ways your brain presents you with imposter syndrome as an easy exit of like, hey, why don't we just not do this? Because we don't know what we're doing, and we'll be much safer if we just sit down on the ground and like eat a granola bar and never leave the house, you know? So it's almost like a defense mechanism. I haven't sort of expressed that before, but as I think about it, it's almost like it's a way of like keeping you from not doing it. Yeah. But I just don't give in to that anymore. But it doesn't mean that I don't face that sort of stimulation or whatever in front of me.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And as you're saying that, and as you're sort of expressing that thought, in one of the earlier episodes, somebody described sort of comfort and discomfort as being two of your best friends, because there are times that like you really do need to sort of hang out with comfort and you really need to feel safe and whatnot. And then there are other times where you really need to spend time with discomfort and you really need to hang out and go do a bunch of new things and sort of, I don't know, live on the edge, I guess. But hanging out with either of them too much is not necessarily the best idea, right? You either, stay comfortable and don't grow, or you're so uncomfortable that you're feeling, immense amounts of stress. And as you're talking about imposter syndrome being like a defense mechanism, I'm almost thinking of this as like your best friend comfort, almost like sharing this message like, hey, you can't do this. Like, this is easy. Sit down, stay home, stay wrapped in the blanket type of thing, which is really interesting. Never quite had that thought before. And now, and so how do you see it now as a good thing?
Well, I've just got too much evidence that it's a good thing. And if I think about all of the most meaningful things in my life, the most meaningful relationships, the greatest experiences, like they all come back to having a willingness to do uncomfortable things. I mean, my music career has led to just so much goodness in my life, and the speaking work, and just like the quality of my friends, and I think being willing to be uncomfortable also puts you on a vibration where you're surrounded by other people that are willing to do the same thing. And so you get surrounded by some like pretty special people, like you talked about Blake, or getting to speak with you, you get to be around some pretty inspiring people by putting yourself on that path. So I've just got too much evidence at this point to do it any other way.
I love the way that you put that. Got too much evidence, got too many things in the piggy bank that just tell me that this is the right thing to do. And that's a great message. And so, Peter, we've been through a lot. We're just coming up on time here. And I just this is something that I ask every single guest just at the end is, I know we've been through so much. You've, dropped a lot of different, really key messages, along the way. But what would be your one piece of advice, for somebody that wants more out of that? What would be your one piece of advice for somebody that's looking to get more out of their life, whether it's like to step into their purpose or to like start doing more uncomfortable things so that they can grow as an individual? What would be your one piece of advice for that person?
Well, I think I have two. That's okay. But one is something that I saw on a billboard driving along the Gardiner like 20 years ago that I've always remembered. And I don't know why, it was just a sign, and it was flashing this. It said, "A year from now, you'll wish you started today." And I've always remembered that. And whenever I'm kind of feeling that overwhelm or trying something new, I just remember like, oh yeah, a year from now, I'm going to be better at this. So this is step one. The other thing I would say, which is more, I guess, my own intellectual property versus quoting somebody else, is the idea that I really believe on focusing more on the process than the outcome. And so when I decided in my life that I was going to be a singer-songwriter, I thought it was going to look a certain way. I thought that by pursuing this, I was going to just be playing the Massey Halls and the arenas of the world. Like, I did not expect that I was going to be on a mountaintop with a bunch of teenagers doing this mentoring work, or that I'd be doing the speaking work or facilitation or all these different things. And had I only been focused on a singular outcome, I would have missed all of these opportunities and unexpected ways of doing this thing that I do. But because I was dedicated to the process, that's what led to all these great things. And so I would say focus on the process, focus on the part of it that lights you up. And worry less about the outcome, because the outcomes are going to surprise you. They're going to come at you from different angles, but they're only going to come because you're on that path, focused on the process.
Wow. Really like that message. And yeah, again, if you are so focused on the outcome, maybe you wouldn't have pivoted to your virtual concerts during COVID. And I was part of one of your virtual concerts, I guess, or virtual keynotes when I joined Thank You Live back in 2020, and you transformed Zoom into like an experience that I had never ever seen before. I was doing so much facilitation in 2020, virtual facilitation, and we never had a Zoom event anywhere close to that. So, again, because you're focused on the process, you're able to sort of pivot and focus on some other things. So, again, thank you so much, Peter. You've had, it was a pleasure to like get to know you better, to really learn more about, how you've gotten to where you are, how you've embraced discomfort and vulnerability. And, you shared a lot of important messages that I know other people are going to really appreciate as well. So thank you so much. It's been so much fun having you on the CBD podcast.
My pleasure, Adam. And thanks for doing what you do in the world. It's a beautiful thing, and it was an honor and pleasure to be here.
All right. We'll stay in touch.
Beautiful. All right.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I hope you really enjoyed it and that it inspired you on your journey to living your best life. Now make sure to check out the show notes below for a rundown of today's show with all the important links, such as where to find the guest online and important resources that they may have mentioned. Also make sure to share this episode with a friend or family member and subscribe so you get the notifications when new episodes are released. I absolutely love hearing feedback from you guys, so I encourage you to share a review on the platform you're listening on and let me know what your biggest takeaway was from today's episode. Now it's time to go out and build the life of your dreams one step at a time. And remember, the only way to be comfortable is to be uncomfortable first.